Welcome to Community Connect. This is Fatima Aslam. Today, I'm joined by Maggie Salomon. She's a CPA by profession and the candidate for Fort Bend County Commissioner, Precinct 4. We'll be getting to know her as a person and obviously talking to her about many things, so please join us. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Fatima. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yes.
So, Maggie, I think a lot of who we are is, based on where we come from. Our childhood, where we grew up. So I want to know more about you. Tell us where you grew up. Was it around Houston? And
Right.
how did, that bring you where you are today?
Well, my name is Maggie Salomon, as many of you have heard. I want to first of all say thank you to everyone who's watching today, and thank you, Fatima, and all to the media team who has invited me here this evening. But predominantly, I'm a first-generation Latina, and just like many of us, our parents came here for a dream, right? When they
Yes.
came to the U.S. to give us a better opportunity, right? I grew up in the Baytown East area of Houston. That was where my childhood was. And when I was finishing high school, my dad told me, and my parents told me, we don't have no money for college. Because in the Latino community, they teach you that hard work is best overall over education. I told my parents, well, that's not going to be me. I'm going to leave to college and I'm going to try to figure this out on my own. And sure enough, I did. I graduated and I left and I got my bachelor's degree in business management. Obviously went all the way up to get my MBA as well in business management with a minor in accounting, and eventually got my CPA license. And like many of us, as we continue to grow and evolve in our development, as a person, you meet the love of your life and, and things start to change. As soon as I graduated from college, I went into directly because my dream was I wanted to be a successful business woman in wherever career that was. And I immediately began to work with the greater Houston area, bringing in tourism and working with large chains such as Marriott and Hilton. Because if you're not aware, Houston is one of the biggest oil and gas companies.
Right.
And so my part in that area was to bring tourism and bring companies to stay here in the city of Houston. Shortly after that, I told my husband, I was like, well, I think we now have 2 little ones, right? I think I'm going to take a break as a person in my career. And I did. But me as a person, because I always had that urge or sense of urgency, I couldn't just stay home. I always wanted to be doing something either for my community or continuing my studies. So in that time, that's when I began to get my certification for CPA, because I did get my major, but CPA certification is completely different. So I presented my test and I began to work in the tax world. Shortly after that, obviously, I began to work with a firm and have been doing that for the last 18 years. So something completely different from tourism, went to doing accounting and doing public accounting in the last 18 years. I've been living in Fort Bend now for 22 years specifically. And when I went out there, it was just raw land. The development area that I went to, you didn't see no warehouses, you didn't see any chain stores that we usually see like our Target or our H-E-B. It was still going to be a drive for me to go from my neighborhood all the way, because Highway 6 was the closest thing. But now that has completely changed. It has quickly evolved in the last 2 decades, and I've seen it. And so this is where we are. And so now I've decided to step up and, run as one of the contenders to be the commissioner for Precinct 4.
So Maggie, I'm going to, ask you more about that. But something that you said that really kind of stood out to me, and we have a lot of people watching that are, first generation, and, they've kind of lived that immigrant experience. And you just mentioned that, there's kind of, you always have this dilemma between only working hard and then going in terms of a professional career and the education path. I mean, what advice would you give to, young first generation Americans, who's they have an immigrant background, they're in this country which has amazing opportunities, and sometimes you get conflicting advice from families. So, what would you say to young people like that?
That's a great question, because I actually am a business owner, and
Yeah.
I have worked with so many young women and young gentlemen as well, and they always ask me, what advice can I do? I say, you need to go and continue on your studies further. Either it's in the trade or in a bachelor's degree, associates, but that specific opportunity for you to learn more is never going to be given or taken back from you. I mentioned to you, my parents were like, we don't have any money. I had to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I can understand my first generation young people, what they're going through. I had to translate documents, talk on the phone,
Yeah.
be basically their little manager for my parents, right?
Yeah.
Until they basically got to understand to a better fluent in English, right? So continue to do your studies. There's never going to be a right opportunity. Please don't allow the position that you're in to stop you currently, because your opportunities are endless. You're in this great country that we currently have, and that's what my dad told me. He's like, you know what? I can't speak English, but if I did, you are a person who's bilingual, who can speak Spanish, English. He's like, if I were you, I would already been the president.
Yeah.
and you know what? Up to this point, maybe in the moments, I was like, Dad, what are you talking about? But I know he was telling me that persistence is key, right? Discipline is key. Being consistent is key. Continue in your studies. Nothing's going to come easy to us nowadays.
Yeah.
So continuing to that, to me, is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Maggie. That's such great advice. And as you mentioned, so, you wanted to be a successful businesswoman. Did you end up setting up a business, and how was that experience?
So, yes. So, like I mentioned to you earlier, I always had in my mind that I wanted to be this great, successful career woman. But we all come with different phases in our life. You get in your 20s and you go into the running, right? And I want to be successful in my career. And I did get into up to a position where I thought I was doing great.
Yeah.
But then there's a phase of life where motherhood hits as a woman, right? And for me, priorities, number one, will always be family.
Yeah.
That is my number one key thing. And so at that moment, I had to take a decision. Maybe it wasn't the most decision that I would say that I wanted to, because I still wanted to work. And yes, there's still women who do work.
Yeah.
But I still wanted those opportunities to be with my daughters, maybe went to be in their school events or other area. But that still didn't stop me from continuing to study. So what I did was, number one, obviously did my CPA certification. And number two, I saw an opportunity for a business opportunity. And so I began to set up a dance studio. So my daughters at that time began to do ballet.
Oh.
And I saw an opportunity there, because we were paying so many expenses. If there's any dance parents out there, or any major sport, that's a very expensive area. And I saw an opportunity, so I began doing the business. It wasn't easy. I started with 7 kids. Now today I have about approximately 200 kids that I run, along with my teachers. And that specific business, it's continuing to evolve in that specific niche, So being a successful person or a business entrepreneur doesn't also come easy, but anyone can do that as well. If there is a will, there's a way, I always say.
Yeah. Maggie, tell us about kind of what drew you, as we were talking about, what drew you to kind of be a candidate for this position. Was there a particular experience that made you realize that, that you needed to step up and do something for the community?
So, great question. So many people think when you're running for this specific position as a commissioner, they think that you need to have a big title or a big headline or something behind you. This is my first campaign, Fatima, just so you are aware and make everyone aware. But one of the reasons, your commissioner is a person who is to be serving the neighborhoods be serving you as a person?
Yeah.
So I ask all my people who are following, seeing this, or saying to you, what's the number one key thing that you want when you live at home?
Yeah.
And most people respond to me, well, I want to feel safe.
Yeah.
Well, in 2007, when I barely moved out to Fort Bend, I was a victim of home invasion. And it happened actually during broad daylight. And when I called 911 and I was telling them what was happening, do you know how long it took for a actual officer to show up? It took them approximately 30 minutes to show up. If we are aware how Fort Bend works, we live in areas where it's unrestricted areas. We're not within the city limits. So when people come to us, like a first responder, is usually the sheriff,
Right.
okay? So that to me, that was the first experience that I had obviously thought, I'm like, why is it taking them 30 minutes to just reach me?
Yeah.
I never knew what was the reason behind it. So obviously I was still in my phase of being a mom, right? Then in 2017, I ran into a flood situation where my home got flooded because of Harvey. At that moment, I had my parents living with me, my 2 daughters were, and to be rescued on a boat, that was the most humbling time of my life. I was out of my home for 6 months trying to rebuild and reconstruct, along with my other neighbors and residents, and some took even longer. And to me, that was a very frustrating and very stressful time. And so I began to ask the questions, why did the flooding happen if when you purchase your new home, the developer tells you, or whomever's selling you the home, saying, this is a no flood zone.
Mm-hmm.
So I began to make phone calls. I began to ask questions with my HOA. I'm like, who's in charge of what? Why did flooding happen in our neighborhood? Well, they started saying, well, because there's not enough drainage. Well, who handles drainage? Well, it's your commissioner. And I was like, well, is there not enough drainage? Is there not enough, ditches for, the flow of stream or water to be continuing? I began to ask a lot of questions, and to me, it was very frustrating because I felt like I was just being like a ping pong ball back and forth between the commissioner, our mud districts, or HOA, and people were just, pinpointing to each other.
Yeah.
And I think it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
I really don't. 2 big things for me are very important during my campaign is flood mitigation, making sure that we continually had flood drainage or infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And number 2 is safety. Obviously, as a commissioner, we are to be working for the people, but we are also to make sure that things are accessible for the people who are currently living in our precinct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, Maggie, and thank you for sharing that with us. We'll be back after a short break.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Let's take a break.
Assalamu alaikum, Abu. Happy birthday.
Walaikum assalam, beta. Where is your bhaijan?
Abu, check your phone. I have already sent you something special in US dollars.
You know what, Abu? I sent you something too, but in Canadian dollars.
Thank you, beta. तुम दोनों पैसा इतना जल्दी भेज देते हो खुद कब आओगे इतना जल्दी
Soon.
Be connected with your loved ones in Pakistan with Lemfi.
A for app, B for best, C for confidence से D for download करो इसे अपने फोन पे. Time is precious, order food delicious. सारा पाकिस्तान बोले food papa. Rum pum pum, food papa dum. Rum pum pum, food papa.
देख लेना बारबेक्यू गोला कबाब बिहारी बोटी ETC
seafood, ice cream, cake or beverages.
रोशनी में सब मसाले चटनी केचप सारी डालें सब्जियां फ्रूट
Taza gosh भी बगवाले दा.
बेगम ने पकड़ा दी लिस्ट, कोई ना बहाना है. ट्रैफिक के झंझट में मुझे नहीं जाना है. Rum pum pum, food papa dum. Rum pum pum, food papa dum.
Tempura frozen food. Quick, easy and delicious. फ्रीजर से निकाला, कढ़ाई में डाला और मिनटों में तैयार. Super fast, super tempting. Tempura frozen food. the taste of perfection.
Assalamu alaikum, Abu. Happy birthday.
Walaikum assalam, beta. Where is your bhaijan?
Abu, check your phone. I have already sent you something special in US dollars.
You know what, Abu? I sent you something too, but in Canadian dollars.
Thank you, beta. तुम दोनों पैसा इतना जल्दी भेज देते हो, खुद कब आओगे इतना जल्दी?
Soon.
Be connected with your loved ones in Pakistan with Lemfi.
Welcome back to the show. Maggie, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So Maggie, we were talking about your candidacy. I mean, there are a lot of people watching that may not know what a commissioner actually does. So, if someone's not familiar, what is the role of a commissioner?
Yeah, so the role of the commissioner, number one, is to be working and serving for the people, specifically for a designated area. Each county usually has 4 precincts. So in Fort Bend, obviously, there's going to be 4 precincts. I'm one of the contenders running for precinct 4 specifically. But the commissioners, like I mentioned, is to serve the people and also making sure that they're managing the budget. Right. And the top priorities, obviously, as a commissioner, is number one, infrastructure. Is there sidewalks enough? Like if you have small kids who are walking to school in the new subdivision, is there sidewalks for them to get there safely? Right. Street lighting. Can I get accessibility to the nearest grocery store? Currently there's a position happening right now where I currently live. It's taking about 20 minutes just to get to my grocery store. Yeah. Now, also, like I mentioned before, flood mitigation, drainage, that's a big thing as well. Making sure that the areas that are being developed, there's no flooding happening. Yeah. So also, community involvement, specifically for our seniors or youth, right? With affordability being a big thing currently right now, seniors are in a fixed income with Social Security for the most part, right? We need to bring resources for them, such as, healthcare costs is a big concern, right? So that they can get their checkups, yearly checkups, or anything that they may need currently, right? For our youth programs, are we having enough youth programs for, our children? I, as a business owner, obviously I have a dance program, and sometimes when a parent comes to me, I can't afford this anymore, I do work with them a specific price, because when our youth are in the streets, then that's a big issue for me. They're not right now focusing on either a talent, or they're not utilizing that resource, to continuing their studies in some specific form or manner. Yeah. And that's how we also make sure that our youth are being taken care of.
Yeah. So Maggie, we were talking about how Fort Bend County is, one of the most diverse counties probably in the country, and also it's growing very quickly. So, what are some challenges that, such high growth and diversity, of course, there's a lot of benefits to having a diverse population, but, it also comes with its challenges. So what do you think are some of the challenges that, high growth counties face?
So I think the biggest thing right now that Fort Bend County is encountering is that with such big growth so quickly, we are not developing enough. And so there has to be a sort of balance. When we continue to grow this quickly, we need to also see the other side of it, right? This is where I have our checks and balances, or debits and balances. We need to check, hey, if the developer's coming in here, we also need to make sure we're asking the right questions. What are your plans to develop in our specific area? Because we do want to build opportunities, bring more business into our specific area, build more job opportunities, right? Because affordability is a big key thing, but we can't just continue to grow. There has to be a responsible growth in that currently in our county.
Yeah. Oh, that's for sure. And tell us more about. You were just talking about how one of the main issues is drainage. So, you've been a resident of Fort Bend County. So, what are your plans to address issues like this?
So I think one of the key things was, if I were to be chosen as your next commissioner, is I'm going to be looking to do a county-wide budget audit.
Okay.
Where's our current projects at? How is it? How are they? Where are we currently stating at? Also, creating opportunities for our local residents to understand if they call and say, hey, there's standing water in my street, and that's a big issue, right? Because when there's standing issue, there's mosquitoes or there's flooding or vice versa. Things can happen of that nature. I, as a commissioner, want to make sure that I'm giving a responsibility back to that resident and letting them know, okay, it's going to take XYZ days, or this is where the project is currently at. It shouldn't be a guessing game for them trying to figure out, well, my commissioner's not listening. I reported it, but nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
And it may have something have happened, but there's not a real transparency area.
Right. So, Maggie, we spoke a lot about your work and your candidacy. I want to know more about you as a person. Of course, like when we go through your list of achievements, there's so many. But, as you said, family is very important. You have a family. So how do you kind of juggle all of this? That's a very important question. And, how is there such a thing as balance?
I think yes, there is. I think that there has to be some sort of balance.
Yeah.
I think staying true to yourself is also very important as well. When, I decided to run in this for my candidacy as a commissioner, I think the number one key thing I turned over to my husband, there's an opportunity for me to run.
Yeah.
And I really want to raise my voice and advocate for my neighbors and my residents. Are you with me in this?
Yeah.
Because if you're not with me in this, then it's going to make it very, very difficult.
Yeah.
My husband said, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for me, that was one of the things. Second, well, I'm a very A-type person. I'll tell you that. As a CPA, you have to. I bring with a very pragmatic approach into things. I put everything through my calendar just to make sure that I can fit all the needs of everyone, attending to my kids, to my business, to my husband, to my family, to my campaign, and hearing, all the other things that we are managing as well.
Yeah. So how has the campaign process been for you so far? Because it's your first campaign, as you said.
Right. I think the number one key thing, obviously, people trying to know who is Maggie Salomon, right?
Yes.
And that's a very candid question that I always get. And I would be asking, well, who is she? And why is she running? And like I mentioned to you, I'm running because I do care about my community. I want the area where my daughters are going to continue to grow, if they decide to stay in Fort Bend, to make it accessible for them, make it affordable for them. If you're not aware, Fort Bend also has one of the highest tax rates for home taxes. That's a big issue.
Yeah.
Why is it continue to grow when it needs to be more affordable?
Yeah.
So I'm running to ask all those questions, understand the process, because I do care about the community.
Yeah. So Maggie, like you just mentioned, you have 2 daughters, and there's a lot of young people in Fort Bend County and generally. Like, what do you think are, like, according to you, what are some challenges that young people are facing that perhaps, 20 years ago, like, you were not facing, like, your generation was perhaps not facing, that you think are challenges that today's young kids are facing?
I'm gonna say quite honestly, it's gonna go back to affordability.
Okay. Yes.
So my daughter actually sent me and this is talking a TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they love TikTok, right?
Yeah.
And it was talking about how our current president said, that they were defunding the Department of Education.
Right.
Okay. So if we look at specifically, she's like, wow, if I were to get married, Mom, what's going to happen with my kids? And that was a very candid question for my daughter to ask me. I said, you need to raise your voice. You need to understand what's happening in politics, right? And while I can't control that, because the commissioner doesn't do that, those are some of the key things that I think that challenges that our youth are currently having. They're thinking about, how am I going to afford this? College is costing us millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And when they tell you apply for financial aid, your middle class, hardworking mom They tell them, well, you don't qualify for financial aid because you make too much. If you make 40,000, it already tells you you don't qualify for financial aid. Can you tell me now how a 40,000 salary can pay for college that is costing at a public school setting around maybe $80,000 for the 4-year term? I'm like, that's ridiculous, right? So I, living as a first Latino, I completely understand them. Obviously, I had to step in, making sure that my studies and everything was there. But what happens to the young person who's actually being a good young scholar, right? Very good. Scholarships are not always going to be there. We need to look at other options, right? What are other routes that we can do? As a commissioner, I think that's the number one key thing, bringing programs. I know that there's dual credit programs currently now in place, but we need to work harder. Maybe, and also college is not maybe the area for everybody, right? Bringing in those trades, like being an electrical worker or being somebody who, molds or sews, do stuff like that. Those specific trades are very important as well for our growing economy.
Yeah. No, I think that's, such a good message, because I do feel like, we've been told for many years that there's one path to success. And, you graduate, you go get a good degree, and it's not working for young people anymore. And I think, as you said, that perhaps there are alternate paths that can be, supported by the counties themselves. But also, what advice do you give your daughters?
I always say this is the number one thing. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? But study in something and be very good at it. Whether it's getting your associate's degree or getting your certification to be a paralegal or in any other area, right? I think that's very, very important. Maybe not everybody's going to have an opportunity to do a 4-year degree.
Of course,
But getting a certification in something is so important nowadays and in today's workforce.
Of course,
I hire people all the time, and I look at, what do you bring to the table? What type of certification have you taken? If it's a young person, because maybe they won't have the most experience, right? But I do see what certifications do you bring? What have you done to have yourself to an upkeep of what the workforce is currently? But some sort of certification is better than nothing.
Right.
So continuing to study and continuing their education is very, very important.
So Maggie, I don't think it would be a stretch to say that you're probably very good with numbers.
Yes.
You're a CPA. So, how are you planning to bring that background, that technical knowledge? How would that help you as a commissioner?
I think the number one key thing is we need to understand, and we need to strip right now. Where is our current tax dollars going?
Right.
Because I still have questions. Why is it going to specific engineers?
Right.
Why is it going only to specific people? That is not the way how we should be working.
Right.
Okay. We need to be very transparent in telling our residents where our tax dollars are going. And as a CPA, I can't tell you enough. I have to be very, very transparent with business owners and the public. Hey, this is where your money's going. At the end of the day, they may or may not like it. Hey, but we need to strategize for next year or for the following season, right? And understand how you are going to save or budget, vice versa.
Thank you, Maggie, for sharing all that with us. One final message to anyone watching in the audience in Fort Bend County, in Houston in general, what would you say?
I think the main message that I want to bring to our Fort Bend County residents, number one, do your research. Okay, there's 7 of us in our Democratic side and 4 on the Republican. That's a lot. Okay. If you are a Fort Bend resident, you need to do your research. Do your civil duty of going to vote these primaries. Write them down. Obviously, you cannot bring your cell phone into the poll booth, but you can bring a piece of paper. Look up everybody. Look up their backgrounds. We now have Google, we have ChatGPT. You need to utilize those resources to your advantage. There shouldn't be no reason why you shouldn't find any information of any of us. And look at who aligns with your vision, who's going to be the person who's going to be serving the community, and who's actually going to be accessible to the community as well.
Right, right. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you.
And, we wish you all the best.
Thank
and, based on everything you've told us, you're a great candidate. And, we wish you all the best for the election.
Once again, thank you so much, Fatima, for bringing me here and to all the media team. Thank you so much and for this opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Hum TV, for providing us with this platform. And thank you to our sponsors for sponsoring this show. See you next time with a new episode and a new guest.